There we go. It says we're live now.
Great.
There we go. Make sure that we're also recording. Oh no, we're just using Facebook, so we have to post details. There we go. All right, we're all set.
Cool.
Hi everybody. Welcome to the, what month are we in? January 2023 Rent Prep AMA session. I'm Andrew Schultz, community manager here at Rent Prep. I'm also a real estate broker with something like 14 years of experience in the rental industry. I run a property management company outside of my duties here at Rent Prep. I'm joined today by Carlos. Carlos is the business development manager here at Rent Prep. And Carlos, tell me a little bit more, or tell everybody a little bit more about what it is that you do here at Rent Prep while I double check what's going on with our video here.
Sure. Yeah, so like Andrew said, I'm the business development manager. Typically, my duties, I'm looking to try to grow the Rent Prep presence, if you will, within the industry, social media, things like that. I'm also looking to try to build relationships. Any type of companies that have alignment that we can help out with. Consulting. Mm-hmm. We look at your workflow as a property manager or landlord, and kind of determine what would be the best route you want to go as far as your criteria, and making decisions on whether or not you want to rent. So
yeah, and actually we sat down. So I use the enterprise side of the Rent Prep software, which we talk about in every podcast episode. We mentioned that.
Sure.
And we sat down last year and you kind of looked at the packages that we had for screening and helped me tailor them out a little bit so that they met my needs for what we were doing in our office a little bit better, because we had gone through and kind of recalibrated our screening criteria. And when we did that, we needed to update our packages to kind of go along with that.
Absolutely.
Plus you guys had added like the income verification product.
Yeah, we're always looking for, different products out there that, that are aligned within the industry that's going to help out, a property manager or a landlord with making that decision. And, the income verification report came out early last year for enterprise clients, and I'll tell you, it blew up, especially with the way credit, changes the algorithms and so on. Mm-hmm. The income verification report's really big right now. We're starting to really see that ramp up. It was the end of last year, and rolling into the new year now, we see a lot of changes where they're adding it onto the packages.
So, I know I have the income verification set up on my packages, but it's not something that I'm using a lot right now.
Right.
There are also some landlords I know out there that they won't accept a rental application unless you use that. Like the tenant or the applicant has to use that software, has to pull down their income verification through that. Yeah. They're not looking at pay stubs or anything else at this point. So
pay stubs, today with today's technology, all the Photoshop and things like that, it's very easy to create a new bank statement or a pay stub or something like that. It's very easy to put a friend down as a point of contact for your employer. So the income verification report that we offer, it's nice because it links right to the bank account. Nobody can manipulate the information. It's coming right from the bank to our clients, and they're able to actually see a good financial snapshot of the individual, where they're at the last up to 12 months, reoccurring and so on and so forth. You really can't. You
can't fake it.
No, you can't.
Well, and we're seeing it a lot on the property management side. I think we talked about it, and maybe it might have actually been the last time you were on with me. We talked about the fake pay stubs and stuff like that. I know I had received a couple through our application software. I get them constantly.
Sure.
And whenever I see one, I try to forward it over to you guys so that you can see it as well. Absolutely. And see what I'm seeing.
Yeah.
But the one that I had sent you over, it was such a bad Photoshop. It was so bad. They didn't even try. There was a fold. They took a picture of somebody's pay stub. But there was a fold in the paper, or the paper wasn't straight. But when they overlaid the text onto it, the text was, straight across. It was such a bad Photoshop that you could pick it out instantly. But
but there are a lot of good ones out there.
There are a lot of good ones out there. And they're getting more and more clever too.
They are. It's one of the biggest things. When I have a landlord call in and ask, how do you spot some of this stuff, or do you have any tips or anything like that? Obviously, I immediately say, utilize the income verification, but I've talked to clients in the past that say that with the way technology is and how savvy these things are starting to look, what they're really looking for now is not the layout of the pay stub itself, but making sure the math.
Yeah, the maths the way it's supposed to.
The math is off sometimes.
We've caught a couple of them.
Yeah, that's the way to get them sometimes. So.
Yeah, it's crazy the lengths that people will go through just to. There are literally companies out there. I was talking about this in a thread in the Rent Prep group on Facebook. there are literally companies out there that you can go to and they will sell you a pay stub and a landlord verification and a rental ledger, and none of it's legit. It's all fake.
Yeah.
But if you're a newer landlord or somebody that hasn't been through this process a bunch of times like I have, it's very, very easy to miss something like that, let something slip through, and before you know it, you've got a tenant in there that either has no income or insufficient income or whatever the case may be. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's tough. It's tough out there. So again, that's where I come into play. I work with our product development manager, and we're always looking at different type of data providers, trying to keep up with technology, and again, see what searches are available, that fall within, under the FCRA, making sure that, this information that we're pulling, is not only accurate, but it's also compliant.
Right.
And that's a big thing too.
Yeah. Anytime you're talking about screening, compliance is huge. Like whether it be fair housing, whether it be FCRA on your guys' end, there's a lot of things out there that people don't realize when it comes to screening, that there are a lot of ways that you can step on a landmine before you've even realized it. And we talk a lot about it in the podcast and on here and stuff, but making sure that you have a good set of written criteria is critical, and making sure that you're using good quality screening is critical. And that's, I mean, obviously we're on the Rent Prep for Landlords AMA, so I guess it makes sense to plug the products that we're offering, but I mean, we talk about that all the time, and I live it every day as a property manager, having that written set of criteria that we default back to every single time. So I'm in the process of training a new person in my office right now, and I think that, like it Warren's talking about, like as my company grows and as the industry changes, trying to get new people onboarded and trained in how to do a process that I know how to not violate fair housing. I've been doing this for 14 years. Bringing somebody on that has 14 days of property management experience, like that's a totally different scenario.
It is.
And having that written set of criteria that you can train somebody on and then they can fall back on when it's time for them to start screening makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah, and again, not to plug RentPrep or anything.
Sure,
like
of course.
But when you're looking at different types of screening companies and how you're going to do certain things, and especially in your situation where you're trying to train a new property manager or leasing coordinator to come on, what happens if there's a question and you're not around, and you're unable to answer it? This is where a lot of times, in my experience, talking to potential clients, is one of the biggest things that's really overlooked is the customer service aspect of the company. And with our service, because we have that human element in place, we're not just an AI company where we're pulling information and just putting in a report and spitting it back to you. If there's ever a question, or your new person has a question regarding a report that they've never seen before, it's as simple as a call in. We have people actually here. You're going to talk to an FCRA certified screener. They're going to give you the ins and outs of what you're looking at, because they're going to pull it up right with you. And that is big, versus these AI companies that are put a ticket in. Hopefully you get an email response, and then who knows, you may not get an answer for 2 or 3 days. You need it in the moment where that person's could be either standing right in front of you, or you told them, hey, we'll let you know in about an hour or two, because you got to get this thing leased.
No, absolutely. Well, and the nice thing is, like you had mentioned, so we're sitting in a conference room. The screeners are basically right outside the door here. Like I call in when I get reports that something doesn't make sense, and it happens from time to time. I review a lot of reports, but there's sometimes that I'll call and something just doesn't make sense, or something on the application won't line up with what the report is saying. And you can definitely call, talk to a live human. Everybody here is super, super nice for the most part. No major issues. It's convenient. It's a nice service.
Great.
How did you fare in the blizzard?
I made it. I didn't lose electricity.
Good.
I was grateful for that. But yeah, I mean, we hunkered down. Did some shopping beforehand, so we were stocked up on all the snacks,
all the stuff.
A couple bottles of wine, and
there you go.
So all in all, it was good. We made it through. I helped out the neighbors as best as I could. We did have a lot of unfortunate happenings, obviously in our area, but I'm very grateful for getting through it. And that's what Buffalo is. We
no,
get
you're
through
right.
that stuff.
Yeah, and it's crazy. Like I had about 7 foot of snow at my house. We hit everything. Like the whole full blizzard at our place. And we were fine. We were set up. We had gone shopping, and I actually have a generator at the house for at least I can run the fridge and the furnace and stuff like that. On the management side, we had a couple of buildings that had issues. We actually had one building that the boiler system went down. So like an entire street lost power for a few days. Building froze solid, and the boiler lines, the supply side and the return side, were in an uninsulated chase from the basement to the second story,
Yeah.
and the line split all the way down.
Yeah.
So we had to replace both of those lines to get that boiler back up and running. Fortunately, that was the only real major damage there.
Mhm.
But I mean, you're still talking opening walls, and
Yeah.
it wasn't cheap, that's for sure.
What do you do with a tenant in that situation? Do you put them in another spot, or how
There's
does
not
that
really
work?
much that we can do in that
Yeah.
instance, to be honest with you.
Do you ever prorate or anything like that on rent, or help them out? Say, listen, if you got to stay at your parents' house or whatever the case may be for
Mhm.
3 days while we get this work done.
Mhm.
Do you? I mean, is that
Typically speaking, that's what renter's insurance would cover. So if
Gotcha.
they're without the use of the apartment for any period of time, their renter's insurance should cover
Gotcha.
any sort of thing like that.
And do you
Lost
mandate all
food
of
would
all of
be-
your tenants to get renter's insurance?
So it's in our lease that tenants are required to get renter's insurance and name us as an additional insured. We
Okay.
don't mandate it. I shouldn't say we don't mandate it. It's in the lease, so it's mandatory, but we
Right.
don't monitor it.
Gotcha.
That's actually something that we're going to start working on more in 2023, because we want to make sure that there's coverage there in the event that
Sure.
something happens. The other thing that we're actually looking at is a master tenant insurance policy, like a master renter's insurance policy,
Okay.
where when a tenant rents from us, they would automatically be covered under our master renter's insurance policy. So if something happened, there's coverage.
Sure.
We're looking into that. That's probably going to be something that we roll out in 2023 as well.
And then as far as different states have different laws in place. Are you aware, or do you know of any states that mandate that, or is it pretty much at the discretion of the owner or property
I don't
management
think that
company?
there are any states that mandate a tenant to have renter's insurance. I
Okay.
bet you that there are probably some states out there that say that a landlord can't mandate it.
Gotcha.
I think it probably works in the opposite direction.
Where can you find that information?
You'd probably just have to Google it, to be honest with
Yeah,
you.
okay.
There was a question in New York State for the longest time as to whether or not a landlord could or could not mandate renter's insurance, because
Right.
it's just there's nothing in the law that covers it.
Okay.
And in the absence of something like that, in speaking to my attorney, they're basically like, listen, put it in your lease until somebody questions it, until you're called on it, until you're taken to court and they tell you no, you can't mandate renter's insurance.
Right.
Go with it.
Go with it. Yeah.
And I pretty much every landlord I know has something in their lease that tells tenants that they have to have renter's insurance.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Makes sense.
it makes sense.
I think this is a good segue. There was an individual here from our Facebook group
Mm-hmm.
that, or no, I'm sorry, this was actually submitted through the link.
Oh yeah.
And I think this is the perfect segue. It kind of touches on this. So this question was from a gentleman by the name of Clark. He asked if a lease includes a requirement to, and he put in quotes, maintain the yard and lawn, and tenant lets a few bushes die and the grass get pretty poor due to lack of watering.
Mm-hmm.
Can you charge them the required fixing or upkeep when the lease ends? Charge the security deposit? Question mark. My issue with this is that I understand you put that in the lease to maintain, but maintain could mean something different to you,
Right.
different to me.
Yeah.
You know,
It's the same thing as what is broom clean.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So letting the grass die, letting a few bushes die. I'll tell you right now, my wife, she can water bushes all day long, and they're gonna die on her.
Oh,
she
yeah.
just she just can't keep
Can't
a
keep
plant
a
alive.
bush alive to keep them.
Yeah, flower in the house, forget it. It's just not going to happen. And then again, if we're going through a hot summer or something like that, Buffalo had, believe it or not, we have summers here.
We have summers.
Um,
They're very short, but they're very
short.
warm.
They're very warm. And last year we had a pretty hot summer, and I know my lawn. I take pride in it, but it got to a point where, like, listen, I can't be watering. My water bill's going through the roof
Right,
at this
right.
point. Where's that balance? How should Clark address something like this?
So typically with a situation like that, if we're getting complaints from a neighbor, or if we do a drive-by and we see that the lawn is 6 inches to a foot,
Sure.
it's definitely that's longer than what it should be.
Right.
At that point, we're probably going to stop, take a picture, send a notice to cure to the tenant, and let them
Okay.
know that they have, X number of days to get the lawn cut, or we're going to send someone to cut it on their behalf.
Okay.
And then we also include, our leases are set up to include a clause that if we have to provide a service to the tenant that the tenant is supposed to be taking care of, like lawn cutting,
Gotcha.
we can back bill the tenant for that.
Okay.
So that's how we would typically handle a
And
situation
then,
like
do you
that.
put any verbiage in that lease, saying that that's what's going to happen?
I know we have language in the lease that if the tenant is issued a notice to cure and doesn't, we can actually terminate their lease at that point.
Gotcha.
So,
So by billing them out, you're cutting them a break. At that point.
kind of, yeah.
get
It's
you.
the way I would look at it.
Okay.
But yeah, that's typically how we would handle a situation like that.
Gotcha. Okay. I have a question here from Sharon.
Mhm.
She said that my tenant has missed a month of rent and is not responding to calls or emails.
Mhm.
What is my next step, and when should I try to evict?
I would try to evict yesterday.
Okay.
The next step is so every state's a little bit different.
Okay.
Here in New York State, we now have the 5-day your rent is late notice, and then the 14-day pay or quit. It used to be just a 3-day pay or quit notice.
Okay.
So every state's a little bit different in what the rules are with regards to what notices you have to serve and how they need to be served.
Okay.
If you're not comfortable, hire an attorney that deals in landlord-tenant law, and they can handle the whole process for you. The nice thing about having an attorney handle it is in 2023, there have been a lot of changes to state laws as a result of COVID and temporary laws that were put in place that may not have been stripped back out yet. So if you're in a position where you're not doing a lot of evictions, it's not something that you're doing with any level of frequency.
Right.
My recommendation is hire an attorney to handle it, because then you know it's being done right.
Gotcha.
The process here in New York is you've got to send your 5, serve your 14-day. Once the time frame runs out, then you can actually file the petition to. You have to file the petition in court for, what is it called? Petition to reclaim. It's a non-payment petition. I can't remember the state terminology for it, but you would file that along with the notice of service and all that. The tenant has to be served the court documents at that point. That typically gets handled by a process server. Show up in court, process kind of works through. In New York State, to do an eviction,
I was just about to ask you, and I think you're about to answer.
Yeah.
Where are you looking at as far as cost for this type of stuff?
For cost, actually,
And then how long, on average, is something?
I was actually going to go into time frame.
Sure.
So I think my last eviction, like front to back, soup to nuts, ended up running about $1,100.
Okay.
But that was also that's the first service on the tenants, which we
Right.
have our process server do. We don't do that in house anymore. Again, takes the liability off of me. If
Right.
something gets screwed up in the service, it's their fault, not mine.
Right.
Doesn't mean we're not going to get tossed out of court, but at least I can point a finger as
Sure.
opposed to having to eat the blame.
Yeah.
So that's the process service. That is filing for the petition. That's the attorney appearance in court. And that's filing the warrant to have the tenant physically removed from the property once the court case has been heard and we've been granted the eviction.
Gotcha.
That's running us probably about $1,000 to $1,100 right now.
And then time frame, on average, would you say, from start to finish? 1 month, 2 months?
So we had 2 evictions in all of 2023. We had 2 evictions.
22, you mean?
Sorry, 2022. We've had 2 evictions. The first one started in March, and that tenant wasn't removed until September.
Wow.
No, October. Sorry, October.
And they never paid rent for those 7 months?
No, they were paying. That one was actually a holdover eviction. We terminated the tenancy, and they didn't move out at the end of the tenancy because they were having trouble finding a different place.
Right.
So eventually it got to a point where we had to go through the full eviction process, and there are a lot more ins and outs to that case that I can't really get into, but that one was rough. That one took us several months.
Gotcha.
Then we had a non-pay that we filed in September, and that tenant was set out in December.
Okay.
So about
90
60 days, 60 to
60 to
90.
90 days? I get it. So at the end of the day, you're looking at about $1,100, at least in our area, and then, between 60 and 90 days of no rent on top of that. So
At least.
you're tipping that 3,000 to 4,000 range, depending on how much you're charging for rent at that point.
Well, and
It's tough.
not for nothing, like that kind of goes back to the discussion we were having earlier about tenant screening. Like
Right.
I tell my management clients flat out, I would rather let your apartment sit vacant for an extra month or 2 months than put a bad tenant in.
Absolutely.
Because the cost of getting rid of a bad tenant is so much higher than the cost of vacancy.
Yeah.
You got to figure it's the lost rent, it's the attorney's fees, it's the court costs. It's also the damage that they're doing to that apartment because you know that they're treating the apartment like absolute garbage while they're still living there for the most part. There's a lot of damage that can happen in a very short time frame while you're going through one of these eviction hearings.
Yeah.
So
You know,
it's definitely worthwhile to make sure that you've got your screening right.
absolutely,
on the front end.
and not to beat a dead horse here or anything like that, but that income verification, I tell a lot of our new clients is, not only does it tell you, available balances and all that, but I like to advise my clients, lean on it also for, a cushion.
Right.
If something happens, if you're verifying, well, I have a system in place for pay stubs, and I call the employer, and I've seen their credit report. But what you don't see or what you can't see is, okay, well, if you've done all that, you think you got somebody that potentially is going to be a great tenant as far as payment goes. What happens if they lose that job?
Right.
Then you have to refer to the bank account. Okay, well, when I let this individual into the into the apartment, did they have $500 available in their checking account,
Right.
or did they have $5,000?
Right.
You know, do they have the money or the funds, you know, to back them up in case of a gloomy day or loss of job or
Yeah.
a bad divorce or whatever the case may be, and how much do they have on something like that? So again, it's just
That-
another tool that I love that income verification report for.
That literally happened to me, actually, right as I was getting into the property management. No, sorry, I was just, well, I was in my first property management job,
Mm-hmm.
and I had just signed a lease with two of my buddies on an apartment in Tonawanda.
Mm-hmm.
And like 3 days after we signed the lease on this apartment, I get called into the office, and I got laid off along with two other people in this property management company.
Yeah.
And by the way, everything had worked out fine because that was the last time that I ever worked for somebody else. Thanks, Ralph. I appreciate it. I still see that guy every once in a while, and every time I give him a nice little wave, not
Sure.
necessarily with all 5 fingers. But no, that was actually the last time that I worked for another person.
Gotcha.
That was when it became really, really clear to me. Like I'm sure it's clear to a lot of people watching this video that you kind of have to take control of your own destiny at some
Right.
point, and that's when I opened up my own property management company,
That's
and
awesome.
it worked out well.
That's a
But
good story.
it was terrifying, and
Oh, of course.
it's a real sharp reminder that tenant screening is a snapshot in time.
Yeah.
And there really is nothing that says that tenant doesn't lose their job 2 days after they give you that pay stub.
Exactly.
So yeah, I mean, mortgage companies will actually call and do a verbal verification of employment, like the day of your closing,
Sure.
just to make sure you still have your job.
Right. Right.
We do something similar with utilities. We call and make sure that you switch your gas and electric over the day of,
Mm-hmm.
but we don't actually do like an employment verification. Most
Right.
employers getting an employment verification is a nightmare,
Sure.
as I'm sure you guys are aware because it's something you deal with every day.
Yeah,
But
every day. Yeah.
yeah, that's definitely something to consider, is that tenant screening is a snapshot in time, and just because somebody screens great on day 1 doesn't mean they're going to make a great tenant on day 2.
Exactly. Exactly. All right. So let's get into some questions actually from our Facebook group.
Sure.
So
While you're pulling that up,
yeah.
we have Josh in the marketing team who's kind of watching the back end of everything for us, and we keep getting pop-ups that our frame rate is low. I hope Josh is listening. I just want him to pop up and give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down as to whether
Do
or
we
not
have
we're...
a feed of any live questions too?
Can you scroll down here a little bit? Looks like Josh is in here, but that's it at the
Gotcha.
moment.
Okay. All right. So we get this question. It seems like we get this question quite often. I always like to answer certain questions, you know, because again, we are always getting new listeners and new people in the group. So, this question is from Rita. It says rental collection is getting frustrating.
Yeah.
So-
Yeah, it is.
Not real versed in landlordship.
Mm-hmm.
In our leases, it states that they can mail, hand deliver, etc. the monthly rent. I'm thinking a rental collection website is the way to go. Our tenant mistakes our kindness for weakness, and now they've been tenants for about 2 years, and find ourselves asking them for the rent, you know, every single month. So they're constantly asking for the rent because apparently this person's not mailing it or hand delivering it. I mean, I guess, yeah, I mean, if there's got to be technology out there so that the person doesn't have to leave the home, just link your bank account and just automatically pay.
There's a bunch of different options out there. It sounds like this is a smaller landlord. They could probably get by using one of the payment apps out there. Cash App, Venmo, PayPal. I'm missing one. Cash App, Venmo, PayPal. Zelle, thank you.
Yeah.
We just did a video. It's actually up on the RentPrep YouTube page, youtube.com/RentPrep, that actually goes through all 4 apps, the pros, the cons.
Josh, if you could put that in the comments, that would
actually be awesome.
Then we can get.
That's a great video. We spent some time really breaking down the apps, what the fees are associated with it, what protection there is for the landlord, what protection there is for the tenant. That's probably the fastest and cheapest route to go.
Yeah.
If you were looking for a piece of software, I use Appfolio, which is more for property managers. You have to have like 50 doors before they'll even talk to you, I think. There are some softwares out there that will go smaller. I think apartments.com still has their software. They bought Cozy. I don't know what Buildium is using for a minimum number of units currently. I don't know, would Steza really qualify for... I don't know if you can accept payments through Steza.
If I'm not mistaken, yes, they have something that accepts rent payments, and obviously you can see your analytics there. So it's
Right.
Stessa, yeah, STESSA. You might want to take a look into that also.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So there's a few different options out there, but more so than talking about apps, talking just about this tenant doing whatever they want in terms of payment. as soon as the tenant is late with their rent, apply the late fee and send them their whatever the first primary notice is that you have to do in whatever state you're in to get the ball rolling on the eviction. Because as soon as you start showing that you're serious about the situation, the tenant's going to start taking it much more seriously.
Gotcha. Yeah, you dictate the tempo of the rent
Absolutely.
payment, so yeah, that makes sense. Question from Becky. During a tenant screening, what do you do if you can't get a hold of the previous landlords? One is a management company and the other is an apartment complex.
So I actually responded to this one in the Facebook group. It's a shame.
Oh.
I had like a long post on this. So if you're in the Facebook group and you happen to come across this post, I have a pretty lengthy post on there about this one. But the discussion that I was having was with regards to verbal landlord references, and we actually kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, but we'll go a little bit more in depth here. I don't do verbal landlord references anymore. We've stopped doing them maybe a year and a half ago now at this point, and we just found that they weren't worthwhile. As you had mentioned earlier, it's very, very easy to fake a landlord reference.
Yeah.
It used to be that people had landline phones and you could do a white pages reverse lookup and you would find out, okay, this is the name associated with that phone, this is the address, whatever.
Sure.
Now everybody's using cell phones and that data is not available anymore. So it's very easy for anybody to say that they're anybody over the phone, and you're never really going to know for sure who you're actually talking to.
Right.
So for that reason, that's one of the main reasons that landlord references are starting to become less and less commonplace. Something else that we noticed is that it's one of the ways that we kind of worked around it is we'll look at the tax record for the address and see if the tax record matches the name that they're giving us. And we'll like Google the phone number to see if maybe there will be an old apartment ad up or something, just trying to tie everything together.
Sure.
But if I think that I have a landlord reference that might be fake, I'll give a fake piece of information. Like if you're the landlord, I'll say, they said here that their rent was $900 a month. Is that correct? When actually the rent that they listed was $950 or something like that.
Okay.
If you correct me, chances are you're probably a landlord.
Right.
If you don't correct me and you're just like, oh yeah, that's correct, could be a friend.
Sure.
So what I do is at the end I come back to that same question and say, I'm sorry, I just wanted to double check. Was that rent $9 or $950? And sometimes you can kind of suss out whether or not it's a valid landlord reference or something that way.
Gotcha.
But honestly, it's gotten so hard to validate landlord references. The other thing that I'd mentioned in that thread is just because you get a landlord reference, like let's say you actually get a legitimate landlord on the phone. Okay? If that's a bad tenant, that landlord has a high likelihood of saying whatever they need to say to get rid of that tenant.
Sure.
So how trustworthy is the information that you're getting from that landlord?
Right.
Even if you do get a landlord, like an actual legit landlord, and you start asking questions, here in New York State, we have blacklisting laws. So if that landlord says something to you that violates the state's laws, like the new HSTPA laws that were put in place in 2019, you could be taking a risk that way too. So is it worth talking to someone just to get answers to questions, maybe getting more information than what you legally should have, and putting yourself at risk? And then the last thing that I mentioned in that thread was subjective versus objective information.
Right.
Anything a landlord tells you about cleanliness, like we were talking about what's broom clean.
Sure.
Noise complaints, who says that the tenant was, it's all subjective. I want objective data. What was the rent? Was the rent paid on time?
Right.
Are basically the two main questions that I'm looking to find out.
Sure.
Yes, I suppose there is an opportunity there for someone to slip through the cracks and be a bad tenant that's paid their rent the whole time and this and that and the other thing. But more than likely, something else is going to red flag on that application beyond the landlord reference.
Sure.
That's going to wind up with that application being in a denial.
Gotcha. Question from David. He asks, do you have a lease guarantor sign the entire lease, or just an addendum that states they reviewed and will be liable for said lease?
We just did one of these this morning, as a matter of fact, and we don't do we have the guarantor sign just a guarantor agreement. So the way we do our leasing is digital now. Everything gets signed via email. And basically, we load all the documents in and put in where everybody needs to sign an initial. So on the main lease, it was a two-party lease, or a two-tenant lease. So we had two tenants on the main lease in that, like the header information, between landlord's name and tenant's address from this date to this date. This is the rent, blah blah blah. That was on the actual lease.
Okay.
Then on the second part of it, which is the guarantor agreement. On that, we actually have the tenants and the guarantor sign.
Okay.
And the guarantor is indicating when they sign that they've read and agreed to the terms and conditions of the lease as well. So they're just as responsible as what the tenants would be
That's
for
what
the terms and conditions of that lease.
I was going to ask you. So let's just say, like, we went back to Clark's situation with, he put in the lease that the tenant's responsible for maintaining the property, but he had a co-signer.
Right.
The co-signer's maybe not living there; it's his parents or whatever. Would his parents also be responsible for
Oh
it
yeah,
as well?
absolutely. And we actually we did one of those maybe 2 months ago where we had a tenant move out that there wasn't a lot of damage, but there was some unpaid rent, and then there was a little bit of damage that took it out past what the security deposit would cover.
Gotcha.
And we sent him and the co-signer both letters telling them, you can pay this within 30 days, and it was a small amount. It was a few $100. You could pay this within a few days, or you can deal with a collections agency.
Right.
And they called us and made a payment right away.
Nice.
So sometimes it works out. Sometimes you'll never hear anything. The nice thing is when you have a co-signer, more often than not, they have good credit, they have good income.
Right.
They don't want an interruption to either one of those things.
Exactly.
So they're more likely to say, what do I have to do to make this go away?
Right. Gotcha. Brian, this is a pretty cool question. I see these, when I go downtown and things like that, you see private lots all over the place that have, maybe a reserve sign per parking space or just a main sign at the entrance that, anybody that is not a resident of this property will be towed. So Brian asked, he goes, I have a 6-unit building and there's a rental house nearby that has guests that like to park in my lot without permission.
Mm-hmm.
My tenants in my 6-unit building are complaining about the lack of space sometimes. I spoke to the last renter of the house about it and things got better. I just spoke to the new tenant as cars started parking my lot again. How have you all solved this problem? He asked the group this one. My neighborhood wrecker will not tow cars from private properties like mine anymore. He's in Knoxville, Tennessee. If anybody has recommended towing service, please let me know.
Mm-hmm.
I think something like that, you can maybe assign parking spaces if the parking lot's big enough. Say, listen, I know bigger complexes. When I was younger renting, they would say, okay, you have 2 tenants, you get 2 parking
spaces.
That's
Yeah.
it. And if there's going to be anybody else, a guest or anything like that, they may have like a guest lot or something off to the side. But it's kind of first come first serve with that.
Yeah.
What do you think for Brian here?
For a situation like that, so there's kind of 2 things. I would definitely recommend doing assigned spaces at that point. If you have a lot that it sounds like is struggling to even keep your tenants' cars in, it sounds like you probably need to assign some spaces there. And I think above and beyond that, I would contact a wrecker company. And so the rule here in Buffalo, it might just be a New York State rule, I don't know. If you have a lot like that where you want to have a company come in and tow it, like you want to engage a company with a towing contract, there needs to be a sign put up that specifies, parking only for guests of 123 Main Street or tenants and guests of 123 Main Street, whatever the case may be. All others are subject to towed at owner's expense. I think it has to reference the local statute, like whatever the local statute is that allows for them to tow.
Yeah.
And then it has to give the name and phone number of the towing company that has the contract.
Gotcha.
And then that way the people, once their car gets towed, they know who they're supposed to contact to get it back.
Gotcha.
But that is actually a thing. We had a car in the city of Buffalo that was abandoned on a property, and the tow company would not come and take the car off the property. They're like, listen, if you can get it to the street somehow, then we can come and take it. But we cannot take it off of private property when we don't know who the owner is, because we didn't know who the owner was.
Gotcha.
And we legitimately had to, it was left in a garage, we had to hook a chain on it, pull it all the way out of the garage onto the street.
Man.
Yeah, before the wrecker company would come and actually physically remove it from the street at that point.
Sure. Huh.
It was a nightmare. That was a headache.
Yeah, I bet.
That was one of those things that it took me like a week and a half to figure out, like, what do you, because that's not one of those things that happens frequently, so it's not something that we have a playbook for.
Yeah, I gotcha.
I have a Blizzard playbook, but I don't have a random car playbook.
Gotcha. Question from Tariq. Tariq wanted to know, evaluating credit worthiness. I recently had a conversation with a property management company, and they informed me that they don't use credit scores and instead have a standard of 80% lines of credit being in positive. I assume they mean obviously late payments and 80% of line of credit. On the other hand, I've seen credit score requirements for 650 or higher. Which one do you use to assess credit worthiness of applicants and why?
Kind of both.
Yeah.
Actually, not even kind of both. Definitely both. So we have a score requirement.
Okay.
We look for a credit score of 600, and
Okay.
that's an averaged credit score. So if there's 3 applicants, we're taking all 3 scores, adding them together, dividing by 3 to give us the
Gotcha.
average. That's how we like to do it in our office. And then if someone doesn't have a credit score, either they have like low or no credit, like haven't established anything yet, we auto assign them a score of 500, which
Okay.
is below our requirement of 600.
Gotcha.
Just because it's so hard to score somebody. Um, because of that, because there's situations where scores don't necessarily match up with payment histories, we also look at the payment history.
Okay.
And there's a few things that we look for. We look for clean payment history for past, I can't remember if it's 12 or 24 months. I think it's past 12 months.
Okay.
And we do everything on a scoring matrix as well. So there's basically, you get 0, 1, or 2 points. 2 points would be clean credit, clean payment history.
Gotcha.
1 point would be like having a collection account, an open collection account with a non-utility, so like a credit card that's past due or an auto loan that's past due or something like that.
Okay.
And the things that are 0 points, or I don't think they're auto denials, but I think they are 0 points. Any unpaid collection account with a utility company, because you can't have a collection account with a utility and start a new account.
Gotcha.
So you have to remedy that obviously before you can rent.
Sure.
Any unpaid debt to a landlord or property management company
Okay.
is, I think, 0 points for an auto denial. I can't remember which. I think there's 0 points. I don't think there's any auto denials in that category. But we look for, we look to make sure that if there's medical debt, actually medical debt's coming off of credit reports.
It is.
But we used to just pull it off ourselves.
Mhm.
Obviously, if you have medical debt, that throws the score off, so that scoring category is not as valid, which is why
Right.
we look at it from 2 different
It's
perspectives.
the same with the judgments and liens.
Yeah.
The judgments and liens don't appear on the report, but they're still affecting that credit score. So I've had clients in the past call me and say, Carlos, my credit, our line is 650. This guy's coming in at 625. He's 22 years old. I'm just thinking that a college student just out doesn't have enough credit.
Right.
When you pull the bankruptcy judgments and liens report, which we offer, on top of the credit report, the person has 1 or 2 judgments against them.
Yeah.
So, again, with the whole credit report, in my opinion, it's good for certain things. When it comes to tenant screening, I don't think it should be leaned on like it used to be.
I agree.
In the past. There's a lot more better solutions out there to give you a better idea financially, of your applicant's, financial snapshot.
What was I going to ask you? Credit score.
Credit score. There's a lot of different scores too. There's the Vantage score.
Yeah,
There's the
that's
resident
true.
score. There's
like
the
17
FICO
different
score.
FICO scoring models.
So there's so many different algorithms out there depending on who you use. And again, I mean, understanding what goes into coming up with this score. I think it's a almost like a dying technology in a way to use and really lean on.
It'll be interesting to see how it progresses over. Oh, I remember what I was going to ask you now too.
What's that?
There we go. It'll be interesting to see how it continues to progress over the next couple of years, because we talked. I don't remember if I had Steve on or if it was you. We were talking about how pulling medical debt off of a credit report. It's very easy to get into medical debt in this country.
Sure.
It's very, very easy to get into medical debt in this country. However, you start pulling one entire industry's collections off of credit reports.
Yeah.
Housing's going to be right at the top of the list.
Sure.
Medical and housing are 2 very big hot button issues.
Right.
Medical insurance and housing. How long before they come for us?
Right.
How long before they say landlords can no longer report any negative data to credit bureaus?
Yep.
You can only report positive data. On the flip side of that, I'm starting to see more and more landlords reporting positive credit data, and we're starting to report positive credit data for our tenants to help them build credit in a lot of instances, because ultimately we'll want to see. I like it when tenants graduate from tenancy to homeownership.
Sure.
That's the real goal for me.
Okay.
We had a Section 8 tenant. She was in a domestic violence situation. We rented to her. She graduated the Section 8 program, as I like to say it, and she bought a home.
That's awesome.
And it's a good situation to be in.
Yeah.
The question that I had was, are there states that have already cut the ability to look at credit score And if so, what states, if you happen to know any off the top
No,
of your head?
not yet. Again, knocking
Because I
on
know
wood
we don't
here.
have evictions in New York anymore.
Right, we don't have evictions. Certain states have certain ways that you have to run information. One that stands out is Cook County, Illinois. Um, you
Which is
know,
Chicago, right?
yeah, Chicago area. So if you own property out in that area, you can run a background check, but you cannot run a criminal. If everything checks out based on your criteria of the background check, meaning you're looking at at that case you can look at evictions and judgments, liens, and credit report. If everything checks out, you have to make a conditional offer, then you can run the criminal report. And if the criminal report comes back with a hit, then obviously you're on a conditional, you can pull.
Mm-hmm.
But the reason why they're doing this is they're trying to regulate, also, you know, uh, people that may have a criminal background or misdemeanor background. They don't want you to be skewed right out the gates. It could
Right,
be
right.
petty larceny or something.
Yeah.
And, something that's still reportable.
Right.
But they made a stupid mistake when they were a kid.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever the case is, they were 16. Now they're in their mid 20s or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So this is why they're doing things like that. When it comes to not being able to pull credit reports, they don't have that yet. But the closest thing they do have that I'm aware of right now, and again, this is our compliance officer, Chrissy. She runs the roost when it comes to this stuff. But from what I understand is that there are certain laws that say if an applicant gives a credit report,
Right.
and it's within 30 days of it being pulled,
Mm-hmm.
then the landlord or property owner at that point can accept that. If they
Mm-hmm.
don't want to accept it because they think there's been some type of manipulation,
Right.
then it's at the expense of that property owner to rerun it, and they can,
Mm-hmm.
but they have to pay for it. They can't charge the applicant and say, no, I don't like this, you're going to give me another one and you're going to pay for it. So that's as close right now as how it's coming.
So I know in the state of New York, that's the law of the land here. If
Yeah.
somebody gives you a credit report and it's dated within 30 days, you
Yeah.
have to use that credit report.
Right.
But like when I go into order, my credit report and my background check are tied together.
Mm-hmm.
So like I'm ordering the whole thing
Right.
regardless.
Sure.
Which honestly I would probably still do anyway,
Mm-hmm.
just simply so I know that the data is as fresh as possible, number one, and as unaltered as possible, number two.
Sure.
And I think that that's an expense that I would actually be willing to absorb.
Yeah.
Because I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, and I know. So again, in New York State, we're capped at $20 for
Yeah.
a credit and background check fee.
That's
It's
terrible.
not an application fee.
No.
It's a credit and background check fee now,
Yeah. Yeah.
and you're capped at $20.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say what my expense is on every credit and background check that I run,
It
but
exceeds
you and I know that it
$20.
exceeds $20.
Sure.
So we eat that cost internally
Right.
on every credit and background check that and whatever, it is what it is.
Yeah.
It's obnoxious,
Sure.
but I understand why.
Mhm.
Like, I get it. I just think that there are a lot of laws that get passed by legislature
Mhm.
that end up harming the people that they're intended to help.
Sure.
Not necessarily that one, but there are some others out there that I could kind of point fingers at, but that's another topic for another day.
Whole another day.
A whole nother day.
Marie wants to know. She said, I had a new tenant pay the deposit and prorated rent and propane, which I didn't ask for. After 5 days, she wouldn't sign the lease agreement and demanded her money back. I returned all but the showing fee, legal review fees. She wanted verbiage in the lease changed twice, and holding fees. She's mad and threatening me and putting signs. Da, 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 da. I've told her that she can communicate with me through my lawyer. What can I do, if anything? So I guess Marie refunded everything except for the show fee, the legal review fee, and the holding fee because this applicant wanted that lease changed twice. She's not giving that money back. Obviously, the applicant's upset, getting a little nuts on social media and stuff like that. I mean, she's I don't know.
If you have it in writing, I wouldn't do anything.
Right.
Like, if you have it in writing that there's a holding fee for holding the apartment, if you
Yeah.
have it in writing that there's a showing fee, which that's crazy.
Yeah.
I wonder where she is. Did she say where she's at that she's getting a showing fee?
No.
If I could get paid to show apartments.
Yeah.
So there was a holding fee, there was a showing fee, and the legal review fee.
And the legal review fees.
And I think that's fair, because if you're asking me to have
Yeah.
my lease altered, number one, I'm not altering my lease,
Right.
period, end of discussion.
Right.
But number two, if you're asking me to have my lease altered and I have to contact an attorney and have them review that file,
Mm-hmm.
there's a cost to that. You're paying that cost.
Yeah.
As far as the tenant being all blustery on social media, I would ignore it, to be honest with you, because in 2 days' time, it's going to blow over, and that'll be the end of it. And even if the tenant went to the media and somehow got the media involved, number one, the tenant's going to have to sign a release before you can talk to the media about anything. Number two, as soon as the tenant signs the release, you can show the media exactly where the tenant signed off on all of those fees.
Right.
And that makes it a non-issue.
Yeah, they're not
and now suddenly they're not even going to bother putting the story out there.
Right.
So you might catch a little bit of flack on social media. It's real easy to pull down a sign if you see something posted out and about in general pop.
Sure.
Yeah, I would do nothing. I would do nothing.
Yeah, as long as you have your signatures, you have all your ducks in a row.
Exactly. If your ducks
it
are in
wasn't
a row,
just a gentleman's. I don't know. That's
gentleman's agreement.
Gentleman's agreement, is that even a thing anymore?
I don't know if you could say that anymore.
I don't think you can say that.
Yeah.
Just a nice handshake agreement.
A handshake agreement.
All right. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, as long as you've got your ducks in a row and everything is signed, sealed, and delivered.
Yeah.
I wouldn't do anything in this instance.
Sure.
I would basically say, well, you agreed to what you agreed to, and we're going to move on with life.
Yeah. Question from Stan. This is real simple. As you start thinking about spring renewals, how much do you see yourself increasing rents?
So New York State. I feel like every time I answer a question, I have to preface with in New York State.
Sure.
Which again, I don't think we actually mentioned it at the start of the show today. You need to understand the laws in the area that you're operating in. There's federal laws, there's state laws, there's municipal laws, and you need to know all of them.
Right.
If you're going to be operating a rental property, you need to know what laws you are working with, what laws you're up against in some instances, and you need to understand how to run your business, because this is a business, and people don't always understand that.
Right.
What was the root question again? Sorry.
So Stan just wants to know, with the spring renewals,
how much are we bumping rents?
How much are we bumping rents up?
So
obviously based on market, but then also understanding your state's cap.
Understanding state caps, exactly. So the rule in New York State is if you plan on raising rent more than 5%, you have to give 30, 60, 90 days notice depending on the length of tenancy. Sub 1 year, 1 to 2 years, 2 years plus, 30, 60, 90.
Okay.
So in that case, if you're going to bump the rents by more than 5%, you have to send that notice out. If you send anything less than 5%, which could be literally 4.99%, it's only a 30-day notice.
Okay.
So, and there's, rules on how you have to serve the notices and this and that and the other thing. We're not going to get into all that. But typically speaking, I look at what market is first. And if the apartment is below market, I try to get it as close to market as possible. Okay. Depending on timelines and how much time I'm going to have to give a tenant to bring it to market or whatever the case may be. But my goal is to be at market value or as close to market value as all times in case we ever wind up in a situation where there's a temporary or permanent freeze in rent prices.
Gotcha.
And with our economy being what it is right now and inflation being what it is, I wouldn't be shocked to see some push for rent control in different areas of the country.
Have you seen that happen in your time of owning your
property? So New York City's got rent control. HSTPA has some provisioning in it that allows for municipalities to vote individual municipalities to take and have rental control.
Gotcha.
There's been some studies done. Buffalo's had a study done. I think Rochester, Syracuse, and Albany have also had studies. So far, no one has moved in that direction, but again, we are in a situation where our economy is kind of crazy. Yeah. Inflation is kind of crazy. Yeah. It would not surprise me at all if we see some lawmakers who don't understand what that would mean push forth legislation that would put those sorts of controls in place.
Right.
Anyway, back to the root question, how much are we bumping rents? I try to go as close to market as possible.
Okay.
If there's a situation where, something like 5% is typically what I try to bump based on the market. If there's less, like if I think we're at market on that unit, I'm not going to bump it that year.
Okay.
If we're under market, I'm going to try to bump it up. My goal is to stay at market whenever possible. I do agree that you should be increasing rents at least somewhat every single year. Okay. Because the expenses go up every single year.
Gotcha.
I don't know any municipality that is reducing taxes on a regular basis. Gas bills are 50% higher this year than they were last year.
Right.
That's like legitimate fact. It's NYSEG and National Fuel both came out and said that. Electric bills are about the same, about 25 to 50% higher than they were this year versus last year. Water services have gone up and are going to continue to go up. I don't know a single contractor who's charging less this year than he was last year.
Yeah.
You know, materials prices have come down somewhat. Lumber's not quite as bad as what it used to be, but we're still fighting an increase in expenses every place all the time.
Yeah.
And it has to filter down, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And sometimes the tenant has to eat that cost.
It makes sense. It makes sense.
It sucks. I don't think anybody loves raising the rent, but
No.
I think
I
that
think there's some out there.
I was just going to say I think there are a couple landlords that do enjoy it.
A couple of them out there. Like, yeah. All right. Let's go back. You know, Clark actually had 2 questions.
Mm-hmm.
So his second question is: if a tenant has a 1-year lease and wants to renew for another year, is it best practice for the landlord to increase the rent for the follow-on term, even by just a nominal amount, or is it common for a landlord to simply keep the same rental amount, assuming it's still the same rough market and they're a good tenant? So I guess the question really is like, what if you got an outstanding tenant there,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and they balk about the 5% increase? Listen, I've been a great tenant. I've been with you for, 5 years now. Would you reconsider or giving them a break for another year, or would you say, sorry, yeah, you have been a great tenant, but I got to increase the rent because of overall expenses in general?
I would probably increase it, to be honest with you. I would probably stick to my guns on it. And the reason I say that is because you can always rescind it if the tenant comes to you and says, all right, I have to move. Right. I can't afford this new rent. I have to move.
Oh, okay.
You can rescind at that point. I mean, you might still lose the tenant. That tenancy might already be gone.
Right.
They may have already signed a lease on a new place or whatever the case may be.
Sure.
But you always have that option of rescinding if they come back to you and say, all right, we have to move.
Yeah.
The other thing I would mention is that the cost of a turnover is usually typically the greatest cost that a landlord faces at any point in the tenancy cycle.
Okay.
So the beginning and end of the tenancy are the most expensive. Typically, you're not doing a ton of maintenance unless something really bad happens in the property. You're not typically doing a ton of maintenance once the tenant's in place.
Okay.
Other than normal repairs and wear and tear stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So avoiding a turnover is typically, priority 1.
Yeah.
If I'm going to be able to take that unit from 1,000 to 2,500,
Mm-hmm.
and I only have to put a few grand into it to get it there, I don't care if I lose that tenant, because the delta there between 1,000 and 2,500, that extra 1,500 a month,
Sure,
over the course of a year, 2 year, 3 years,
mm-hmm.
I don't care if I'm going to lose that tenant. It
Gotcha.
sucks to displace that tenant, but
Right.
You are running a business at the end of the day.
Yeah.
If it's going to be a situation where I'm going to go from 1,000 to 1,200 a month,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm only going to have a $200 delta, and it's going to cost me $5,000 to turn that apartment over,
Gotcha.
I'm thinking real long and hard about rent increases and stuff like that.
I got you. That pretty much is it for what I have.
Did we
here.
have every question on the list today?
Just about. There were a couple of duplicates in here, like the Clark question
Mm-hmm.
and this and that, where it's pretty much the same thing. I mean, I do have one here with Robert. Again, I guess it's with the whole rental increase, things like that. It says, we all know the income 3 times monthly rent metrics.
Mm-hmm.
What about renting out a place with utilities included?
Mm-hmm.
Subtract the average utility costs and use the 3 times on that, and then gross or net income. What would you do? I mean, I'll be honest with you. After what you just told me about, utilities, utility bills, the gas bill going up 50%, and then if this person defaults or whatever on rent, and they kept their heat on,
Mm-hmm.
80 degrees.
Yeah.
You got a $300 friggin' gas bill every
Mm-hmm.
single month now. That's going to be on you.
Absolutely.
Because that's in your name. And
Right.
you have to reconcile that. So you,
Mm-hmm.
even if you wanted to re-rent it, let me ask you this then. Let's just say this is the case.
Mm-hmm.
And the heating bill gets crazy for 3 months. You $1,000. It was in your name.
Right.
Can you rent that unit out and tell the person put the utilities in your name until you figure out what the heck you want to do with this guy and utilities? And then the utilities be turned on under the new tenant's name? Or no? So
I'm not sure I track.
So like you're the homeowner.
Yep. And the gas is
Property.
on in my name.
Gas on your name.
Let's assume it's a single family,
Yep.
1 gas meter for this discussion.
Your tenant did 90 days, no
Okay.
payment, moved out,
Mhm.
gas bill was $1,000, and you're
Okay.
trying to go after that guy for the 1,000. Can you have a new tenant move in and have the new tenant activate that utility in his name?
Gotcha.
And the gas bill say, yeah, you're good
Gotcha.
because the bill is with you, the homeowner, or no?
Why was the bill with me?
Just like this guy, all utilities included.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying. Like, would you ever want to do all utilities included?
We do have we have one building in Buffalo that's all utilities included, but it's a 12 unit. So it's one
okay.
gas meter, one electric meter for the entire building. So that's
Okay,
a little
so that
different
makes sense.
scenario.
Right.
That said, though, like when you were reading that question, I
Yeah.
literally walked through that building a couple weeks ago with an insurance agent. We walked into one of the units, and the tenant was screaming at me about how it was too cold in her apartment, but she had a window open. I walked into another apartment where a tenant was telling me that it was too cold, and they had their stove burners turned on.
Oh man.
And I'm like, this is ridiculous. So, like, yes, there is definitely an opportunity for there to be abuse when you're talking about a utility being on in a landlord's name.
Yeah.
Really, it boils down to the type of tenant you have, whether or not they're going to abuse that utility or not. And that's not something that you're probably going to know until the tenant is in there and actively abusing the utility.
Right.
In a situation like that, the nice thing is in the state of New York, the utility bill lives with the customer, not with the home.
Okay.
So, for instance, if I have $1,000 past due gas bill because this tenant wasn't paying me, and you want to move into the unit, you can put the gas on in your name because you're a new customer.
Gotcha.
That bill still lives with me. I have to figure that out on the back end.
Gotcha.
So that is an option.
Okay.
That's not the case everywhere. In some places, especially places with public utilities, they will put a lien against your house, like water in Western New York. Anybody, any municipality in Western New York can put a lien against your property for unpaid water and send it to foreclosure.
Oh wow.
Yeah, that actually happened in Buffalo. It happens a lot in Buffalo, but it was a big news article a couple years back.
Sure.
Because someone had their home literally yanked out from underneath of them because they had an unpaid water bill that they didn't know about. So that is a thing that can happen. Which is why when it comes to like water utilities, anything that can become lienable against the property, we leave it in the landlord's name. Anything that is not lienable or anything that is separated into just that unit, we put it on the tenant to make sure that the gas and the electric, whatever, are on in their name.
Yeah.
And we call to make that verification the day of move-in. So we know that the utilities are on prior to move-in.
Sure.
No utilities, no move-in.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. There's a military question in here, and to be honest with you, I don't. In being a former military guy, I'm not really sure about this one, but
I'll give it a shot. I don't know all the ins and outs.
I would think, try to get in touch with the chain of command on this one. So, before submitting an application, a prospective tenant requested that he can have the lease only in his name, or at least initially, while there will be 2 occupants total, him and his girlfriend.
Okay.
Because he said that as a mobilized reservist, he has to be the sole lease in order for the Navy to cover the travel claim.
Okay.
His rent is covered via travel claim, and he gets per diem as well as normal entitlements. Is this true? How should I handle this situation, and what to ask for proof of income? His girlfriend doesn't have income. His combined salary and travel claim will be 3.5 times the rent, if it is what he says. So, I mean, with something like this,
Well, I mean, he'll have a DFAS statement, right?
Yeah.
Does DFAS statement show BAH?
It does.
Okay.
Yeah.
So DFAS is the Army's PASA. It's I don't know what it Defense Finance something system, accounting system.
Everything's an acronym.
Everything's an acronym. And BAH is Base Allowance Housing.
Yep.
So those are the 2 things that we're talking about in this instance.
And the other thing is here, it says mobilized, meaning that,
Which leads me to believe short term.
Right. So depending on the branch of the service, if he's mobilized stateside, then I would assume National Guard.
That would be my assumption.
And then how long is a National Guard typically mobilized in a certain area within the states?
Right. Well, and I wouldn't want to sign a lease. My leases are 1 year. So
Right.
if they're on a 90-day deployment,
Right.
I don't want to sign a 1-year lease with somebody that's on a 90-day deployment.
Exactly.
So I think I would want to see their deployment orders.
Yep.
So I know how long it's going to be, and
Yep.
that it's a permanent, because there's permanents and temporaries, right?
Yeah, and it'll tell you the amount of time that they're going to be mobilized. So.
As for the actual income verification, you would just verify it the same way you would any other income.
Yeah.
And then I think the real question here is on the girlfriend not being on the lease.
Yeah.
So our leases are set up so that we can have like responsible parties and additional occupants. So like if you have young children, they would be additional occupants, or maybe you have an elderly parent that you're taking care of, they would be they're not responsible for the lease essentially. They're not paying the rent.
Yeah.
I would assume that you could list her as an additional occupant. She would still be on the lease at that point, just not considered a responsible party.
Yeah.
The issue I would have in this situation is, A, does the military permit you to take a significant other with you? Because I don't know how any of that works.
If I'm not mistaken, it's only if they're married.
Okay, so maybe that's why he doesn't want her on the lease then.
Yeah.
So maybe there is a little tinge of fraud in there to...
Sure.
Listen, I'm not defrauding the United States government.
No.
Like, that's not happening.
Yeah,
like,
they look into that stuff.
No, absolutely. Well, and like, I've had people that have asked me to leave boyfriends or girlfriends off of Section 8 paperwork and stuff too, and here's your RFTA paperwork back. I'm not even going to submit it because I'm not losing my ability to accept Section 8 vouchers because you want to be less than truthful in your paperwork. So yeah. I don't know all the answers on that one, unfortunately, but I think we gave you at least a little bit of information on where to go, what to do.
Yeah.
So that takes us right up to the 1 hour mark, actually. We're just over 1 hour at this point. We're going to go ahead and wrap things up here. Carlos, thank you for joining me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on again.
It's a good time. Anytime I have somebody to bounce things off of, it's a lot more fun for me because, I'll be honest with you, talking for an hour straight's real difficult.
I bet.
Like, I have my water here. I have a water on all of these, and this was full when I came in, and we're only down to here.
Yeah.
If anybody watched the last AMA, which I did from my office, I had like 3 cups of water that I burned through over the course of an hour. So
yeah, I remember when Steve used to do these a few years back, he would just say the same thing. It's kind of tough talking for an hour.
It is. It really is. Well, and like Steve was on a couple months ago. Last month before, and like we got through 4 questions, so I don't think Steve's allowed to be on the AMAs anymore. So we're gonna go ahead and wrap things up here. We'll be back next month in February with another AMA session to give you guys an idea as to where we're at in content life. We are posting videos, at least 2 videos a month on our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/rentprep. You're probably watching this because you're in the Rent Prep for Landlords Facebook group, but if you're not already a member of that, head on over to facebook.com/groups/rentprep. You can also find the Rent Prep page at facebook.com/tenant screening, which is pretty cool. And rentprep.com. If you're looking for tenant screening, if you have tenant screening needs, check that out today. Otherwise, any last words?
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Thanks for joining us, everybody. We'll see you next month.
Take care.